All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to another edition of your favorite cybersecurity podcast, the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Welcome to episode 4 of N of the AI series that we're doing. I have a colorful cast of characters, returning colorful cast of characters, going to my, I suppose, no, that way. I don't know. I'm so bad at this. That way. You got Jeff Collins. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, everybody.
And we've got Raja Mukerji. Raja, hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Going down, Mr. John Dickson's back for like his 37th episode.
Here I am. Howdy.
Hey, and with my co-host with the almost, Mr. Jim Tiller.
Hey, howdy, everybody.
Notably missing is James, and I think it's because it's time of recording. He's got other things going on. We've had a bad run of no James lately, but we'll get him back. All right, part 4. This episode I wanted to dedicate to, because we talked a lot about AI or large language models. We talked about their relevance, what their use cases are, future, past, and present. You know, we haven't talked about yet, guys. Like when somebody says LLMs and AI, and we go security, what does that world look like? Are we talking about something entirely new? Are we talking about same old? Are we talking about same old plus some new stuff? Like, what is it? Anybody want to jump in on this? What does this mean to do cybersecurity in the world of AI and large language models? Again, not everybody at once, though.
Okay, go
there you go. See, I was going to happen. All right, Roger, you started first.
So there's a number of things, right? The bottom line is you can look at this from traditional enterprise architectures and what have you, and we talk about data leakage. Now, one level, everyone's talking about influencing the model, but far more basically is the question of what's actually leaving the organization. We've seen cases where people are using third-party LLMs to literally store data. They might take an internal PDF, a data sheet, what have you, customer list, and just say, okay, you know what? ChatGPT, look at it. And this is no knock on ChatGPT, but it stores the attachment. So your file's just left the building, and whether or not it trains the model, or whether or not there's actually information that they share, is actually secondary to the fact that some bright spark in your organization just took that data and put it somewhere else that's outside the governance control of the organization. So let's start there. I mean, regardless of what the nefarious big data companies can do with it on the back end, the fact of the matter is somebody just took your information and put it somewhere else.
So that ties into the episode we had that kind of kicked this whole idea off for me with Sunil Yu, who talked about how to give AI this concept of discretion, the kind of uniquely human characteristic, where just because it knows everything, it shouldn't tell everybody everything in your organization. But I think we discovered, Roger, this pretty early on, and it was sort of one of those things where AI became a thing. People started asking it questions, sending it data to analyze, and somebody went, wait, are we using all that to retrain the model? Is that suddenly public domain?
That's true, right? I mean, so that's more nefarious, right? Because those are cases where that information sort of leaks, and now it's shared between users, and you can sort of reverse engineer and get it to leak the information that was trained to waste. So that's one aspect there. But just from another, people sharing accounts, you take the data in one place, you Dropbox it, if you will, into the LLM, and then you pull it from somewhere else. So the bottom line is information just left for your organization. And if there's data governance and what have you, it just got completely bypassed.
John?
I got one. Okay, so I'm going to take a dev-centric view of this, which is the starting point is the compute model or the software development model is completely different. We've lived with 40 or 50 years worth of hard-coded rule sets, if statements, recipes, where literally you understand the code, you can audit the code, you can audit the third-party components, you can audit the APIs, you understand. Suddenly you throw in this variable component that either you ingest the output of the code generated by ChatGPT, or you bounce an API and get the results from that API, which come from a LLM. The challenge is this: two things. Now, obviously, the hallucinations are one thing. I think most people understand that. The bigger problem, candidly, is non-determinism, which is, again, you put in a prompt and get a result, you put in a prompt and get a different result, or you extrapolate that to APIs. The problem there is you're blowing up the compute model, and the auditability, the ability to understandability of the model, how it came to those results. Is it transparent? All that stuff is different. And I would say our strong observation from where I'm at is most of the developers don't fully understand that. And they're going a million miles an hour, pulling code from co-pilots or bouncing off APIs, MCPs, and not understanding it. So
okay, so because I don't know if everybody, I'm going to assume that not everybody understands non-determinism. Can you give us the 30-second view of that?
Yeah, and in English, I'll try it in English.
Can you try that in English, please?
You put in you create code or you create something, and you understand the outputs. You create the same thing and you understand the output a second time. It's basically you draw a line between inputs and outputs. You understand when you adjust those that there's going to be a output difference. So there's a cause and effect, a code and output, whatever you want. Like there's a direct line, and that direct line has been broken with LLMs from a variety of standpoints. You don't know the impact. And in this case, I gave the example of prompts, but you can take that, in different directions. You just don't understand the output, or worse yet, you treat the output as if it were gospel truth and not something that came out of a series of neural networks and algorithms.
Yeah.
So I actually Googled this because I didn't ask ChatGPT, but I actually Googled this.
Yeah.
And it says non-determinism, kind of what you were saying, non-determinism in logic programming refers to the situation where multiple alternatives exist for matching facts or rules to a given goal, leading to uncertainty in the outcome due to the lack of predetermined strategy.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that means you can, that's like my kid when somebody gives him a complex math problem and he gives them the answer and they go, "How did you get there?" He goes, "I don't know, I just know it in my head."
Well, I mean, put it another way, right? Let's say there's high entropy information and there's low entropy bodies. So if you want code, and let's say this code specifically is, I don't know, a bootloader. You don't want ChatGPT or your LLM to come up with a different method each time you prompt it.
Yikes.
However, you want it to come
That's
up
it.
You want it to
That's
work.
it.
You want the stack coupling set up, and you want low entropy. There's one or two ways to solve this particular problem. However, if you tell ChatGPT or Cloud or what have you to write you an essay, and it writes you the same essay word for word every single time, it's probably not as helpful. So there's non-deterministic corpuses and there's deterministic corpuses. And in some cases you want low entropy, in certain cases you want high entropy. Write me an essay, you probably don't want it writing you the same essay every single time.
And by the way, I did describe determinism. I want to go back and clarify that. I was just trying determinism. When you don't have that, that's non-deterministic.
Yeah, got it. So, okay, so as applied to then the way that we look at interacting with an LLM, there's a lot of security folks, particularly from the governance side, that got really nervous for a bit because there was some question of when you ask an internet-facing ChatGPT, for example, Claude, any of those, to do something for you. Hey, refactor this bit of code to make it, change this code from C to Python, make this thing do this. Hey, can you tell me what out of these 700 employees, which one of these, what's the mean salary between them or something like that, right? Suddenly the data that you provided to get to that answer or to get to an answer, suddenly somebody else potentially owns that. Have we solved this? Because I heard a lot about it and it went quiet.
So here's the problem. And look, I'm going to get a little bit political over here, but not partisan.
Oh, I like it.
So there are many cases where we attempt to legislate technology. So for example, let's take, for example, GDPR in Europe, right? And the right to be forgotten. How are you going to implement the right to be forgotten inside a non-deterministic LLM system? The fact of the matter is, all these weights went way down in that training, somewhere in the neural network. Even the developers and even the people who maintain it don't know exactly the butterfly effect of how it rippled through the system. So now you've got this legislation that's going to fine you 25 million euros or 7% of your revenue, whatever's higher, and you've got to prove that you've implemented the right to be forgotten. So let's legislate where we don't actually understand how it really takes effect in these systems.
That's well, that's a problem. I actually hadn't thought about that one, because how can you prove that it's done the thing when it's a it's not a, you don't get the same answer every time, or you don't.
Right. So you could push it
Jeff,
from the data set, but what if it's a rolling data set that keeps on retraining?
Right.
You don't start from scratch every single time.
Jeff, you've been kind of quiet. You scare me when you're quiet. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say something. Raja kind of got onto a topic that's a challenge for us too, dealing with the policy side. Like there is strong guidance, for better or worse, in Europe. We don't really have that as much here in the States, and as a result, most companies we found are struggling to figure out how to answer the questions like that, and how do you, there's no true north, there's no authoritative source. NIST CSF, or excuse me, the NIST AI risk framework is not a law, it's recommendations. So we've got challenges there too. What do you, if you're conscientious and you want to get ahead of this and you want to set right policy, how do you do that, and what external sources do you use as references? Those are challenges in 2025.
Well, I think so. One of the things I would add to this is, when you think about this from a policy perspective or a governance realm, I think the piece that's hard is governance and policy never do well when there's lots of gray. Mm-hmm. We've seen this across the board. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what part of the world you're in. That's the piece that's tough. AI and LLMs and all components of this have lots and lots of gray, and that's the piece that's tough. In my personal opinion, I don't necessarily know if we'll ever fix this with policy. I don't know if we'll ever fix this with governance. It's, we've been dealing with this problem or problems like this for 30 years. No one goes out and takes all their trade secrets of their organization, puts them on a website, toggles the flag to be indexed for a search engine, and allows the entire world to review all their trade secrets on their website. No one does that today. Now, maybe we did that 30 years ago, back in, the Netscape days, but we've all learned. I think the same reality happens here. We have to be smart about this. I mean, taking your trade secrets and feeding them in, regardless of what, an LLM tells you, if they tell you that they store this, they tell you that they use this for their model, they tell you they don't use this, blah, 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 blah. I think there's a component of, when your data leaves your facility and leaves your purview, you kind of always have to have some level of thought process around it that, hey, someone else may not be as good of a guardian as I am with my data. And you have to be smart through that. I mean, taking code, and what I always tell people is, people are like, well, I took this code, I fed it in through Claude, and I analyzed it, and, for your example, Raf, I converted it from C to Python. Great. If it sits in a public repository, sure, go ahead and do it. The code's already public. I mean, there's nothing that you're doing within this regard that's causing any undue risk to your organization. But if it sits in a private repository and it's the keys to the kingdom, you probably don't want to do that in a public LLM, regardless of thought process and regardless of governance and policy around it, because those things will always have flaws possibly.
That just gave me a whole lot of new stuff to think about, because I don't think that, because that was the thing, right? We have public LLMs, and you can have like private instances trained on your data, on your environment. This was like the big hubbub when I forget what it was, but the Chinese AI thing that they put out that was like 1 billion times more efficient or whatever, right? People were like, oh, great, let's go use that. And then suddenly you saw people all over cybersecurity people all over LinkedIn freaking out, because you're like, wait, you're giving the Chinese our data, stop it. And so, okay.
So, but what they did though was they also said that, okay, we're gonna allow you to host that locally. So you can host that
Yeah.
information locally. But of course, the problem is, how do you really know that it's actually local and it's not feeding some diagnostic telemetry up to the mothership?
Right.
Still opacity.
In this whole thing talking about code and stuff, I don't want to take a huge left turn, but I'm very curious about what you guys believe. And John, well, all of you probably have some pretty interesting thoughts on this, but pulling security back to its core, what do you think about, do you think AI is going to contribute more to finding 0 days quicker? I've seen scenarios where people talk about where they're using AI and they just go through all the CVs and use it to write code and then create exploits every time a CV is published, as an example. Where is that going in your mind?
Oh, definitely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, look, the bottom line is, unfortunately, it's a bit of a lost art, right? And there used to be people who could just smash the stack for fun and profit, as Aleph 1 wrote years and years back, right?
I still have that somewhere.
Exactly, right? And then there were heap overflows. But the thing with heap overflows was they were trickier to write. So fewer people could write heap overflows. But now with LLMs, you don't even know how to do it. I mean, script kiddieism has been literally taken to the next degree.
Yeah. Now, I would add a couple things. Number one, obviously, and we may have already touched on this in the previous episodes, but like obviously the ransomware writers sound more like native speakers. There's that one. Script kiddies look more like nation state threats. I would say the other thing that we're seeing, and we've seen and heard of anecdotally, is putting up vulnerable code all over the place to get pulled into different language models with the intent of, again, creating people pulling it and it looking like it's real and it's vulnerable code. So it's just like,
Okay.
I think the attackers are really good that way.
Let's pull on that one, because I wanted to make sure that Jim, that was a good segue that got us to this, right? So an attack method, I've read about this, and I wasn't entirely sure I quite understood it, but that made it easy. Thanks, John. So because these LLMs largely, I'd say, will scrape the internet, mine the internet, use the internet is its knowledge base, I guess, or its learning base. So you could ostensibly put out purposefully vulnerable in a complex way, but otherwise really good code, right, for something that people want, and just wait until it makes its way into an LLM. Wouldn't it just be easier to go to Stack Overflow and just help folks? What's the difference? Is that a new vector? Is that a worsening vector, or just another way?
It's another thing to worry about. I mean, it points to the trust component where you don't trust the outputs implicitly. I think that's
right.
If you thought about doing that, here's a good reason why you shouldn't trust the outputs, developers. All
right. Well, that's okay. So we've covered governance issues. Talk to me about architecture. Like when somebody says, "I'd set up an AI LLM lab at home," what are they actually doing, and how does that? I imagine like people thought about this and like, well, do I need a supercomputer? Like, what do I need? What's the architecture? What's the implementation look like, guys?
Well, I mean, it's all dependent. I mean, if you have a Mac, you can certainly go deploy it directly on top of a Mac. I mean, it's pretty simple. You can watch a 5-minute YouTube video and get one deployed on your Mac. I mean, you could technically deploy on any piece of hardware. I mean, it doesn't have to have anything special. It's just going to take a lot longer to operate. If you deploy on a 486 from 1994, it would technically probably work. It's just going to take 3.5 years to compute anything. So
don't make fun of YouTube that way.
but that's the reality. I mean, it's the barrier to entry on it is really low, Raf. I mean, it's super easy within that regard. I think the key is that as you go down that, and Raja mentioned this earlier, you have to be careful with what you do, because there are private LLMs out there that do feed data upward. And so you have to be careful, even though it's quote unquote private, even though it resides on your hardware, on your infrastructure, you have to be careful. You know, it's that adage that we always deal with, you know, trust but verify. You know, you've got it deployed on premise, great. Understand what's going out, understand what that communication path looks like, understand where your data goes, because just because it's on your own machine doesn't mean someone else is taking it.
I just
Fair.
said, like in 3 or 4 words, like more than 3 or 4 words. What data are you training on? Like that's the biggest thing. It's like so if you're at home, who cares? But if you're in the corporate world and training on corporate data, there's probably bigger risk there.
Can I pick away at that because there's a consistent theme here, right? And while I'm not a huge fan of the security of CIA, right? I may not fully buy into that. I'm more of a Neil's sort of view of die kind of thing. But when we talk about what I like to call instrumentation, so we've all been in those sort of high level meetings where we're looking at charts and graphs, and you're like, I'm not entirely sure you're looking at the right information in the right way. We're talking about that like Zilla form, you know what I'm saying? So what is the role of security when it comes to integrity of information as we move rapidly in this
That's
direction?
a great question.
Right? So we talk about
probably to look at like shadow AI, to look at all the artifacts of exfiltration and see where it's going out and how it's going out via.
Wait, are you saying I need an AI to watch my AI? This is not going in the direction I
No, I
wanted
mean,
it to
like-
go.
like,
John.
making machines.
Again, that was the panel at at RSA that was on shadow AI. There's not an easy like single way to do it, but yes, you can look at all your existing technologies and O365 to figure out what's connected to what and what's going out, and that's probably the security role, is to make sure that despite a policy, despite whatever good intentions, if somebody does download a model from Hugging Face and does train it on your corporate data, how does an organization detect that?
I think that's right. You know, the reason when I started talking earlier on today, I said let's start with the basics. Is because if we start with an AI to watch the AI, then this is just going to go. I mean, it's turtles on top of turtles on top of tubes on top of tubes.
The turtles all the way down.
And so we start with the basics. You know, the data gravity question. Where's that data going?
Yeah.
If we can't answer that question, then we can implement all the new technology in the world. It's not gonna help.
I think my variation of that, what Roger said, is like security basics. Like, yes, don't think that AI is magic and you have to throw out security basics. Like, no, security basics and AI. Just defense in depth, least privilege. You know, don't assume anything and fail quickly and detect failure. You know, all those old school things. You know?
Guys, how do you? Because Jim started, John, you talked about it a little bit. How do we, in the new reality that we live in, and maybe Raja could, from your perspective of the company, how do we detect somebody quote using AI or an LLM externally? Because like I sometimes I didn't know Clippy was an AI, right? Like what else out there is an LLM that we simply interact with all the time that we don't know? Like I had a great meeting 2 years ago at RSA with somebody that went to talk to a bunch of companies, and Gary says, I think I'm going to need an AI to monitor and I need an AI I need a co-pilot for my co-pilots, is what he said.
Okay.
So when you're talking about in like out there in the office space, you've got people solving financial problems with LLMs. You've got people rewriting content for marketing in LLMs, and you've got people that are getting art and other kind of stuff done with LLMs. We're interacting like I've got Grammarly on that I love, because otherwise my writing starts to fade a little bit longer, right? So it helps me write better, but that's an LLM that's offering to write for me. Where does that data go?
Yeah.
And is it happening only on my machine, or is it like out there this is I don't think the problem's understood.
No, so there's some patterns of startups that we're starting to see right now that take advantage of some very unique or very common fingerprinting of LLM-like behavior. So, for
Okay.
example, if you see LLMs on a workstation, if it's actually training, if it's actually populating that vector database, it has a very specific sort of CPU and IO kind of pattern that you would expect to see. Now, there's a number of startups that we've been, well, very frankly, we've been exploring and been sort of talking to and looking at, where they say they can fingerprint that kind of behavior. But that's, of course, only if you're hosting that LLM locally and you're lucky enough to have the fingerprint of the IO pattern and the profile and the vector databases and the GPUs on that machine. You also see similar patterns when you train data, whether it's a constant stream of data or if it's batch and release, you see these on the network as well. Now, they kind of look either like a stream of telemetry or they look like bulk batch updates, which weren't triggered by a user and what have you. And yes, this is an emerging space, but there are ways you can heuristically fingerprint that nature of data that's going up, because when you try to train an LLM on a constant basis, it looks like a certain thing.
Yeah.
Now,
it has a strong footprint. It's not like steganography or covert channels or anything like this. This does have a pattern that can be detected with current tools and or other means. So I'm not that worried about it. It's just like one thing, you nailed it though. Like, what about, LLMs implemented in SaaS platforms that are consumed on the web by desktop workers? That's one thing. I would argue that a slightly different thing, which is I worry more about the architects and the dev managers downloading Hugging Face and doing things that they technically can do within the enterprise. I am less worried about desktop users because the impact is just less consequential. And so that's kind of been the focus of the policy is, successful programs is like, let's get those folks in the room, use that great talent, give them some guardrails, put them the right way. But like, those are the ones that can blow things up and turn things off accidentally.
So I've got a use case that popped to mind. A friend of mine has been writing a lot of proposals lately, right? On RFPs, and he's like, I know people in the big four government contractors, that kind of write RFP after RFP after RFP, and it wouldn't be a far stretch to say that probably some of them have gone to some LLM someplace and said, how do I make this sound better? How do I make this more competitive? How do I make this more, how do I make this proposal stand out? How would someone like, okay, so that information is out there, right? That proposal, gone, off to the internet. As a competitor of theirs, how would I get to it? Like, how would I grab that data?
It depends. First of all, I wouldn't use it that way. I would use it for brainstorming and not put my proposal up.
You're a smart guy, but
yeah, I would do it the other way around. Like, how do you do prompts? It depends on the settings of the LLM is the real answer, but okay. I don't know. I would propose a different way, probably a more advanced way to do that, which is to do a internally trained one LLM that you can use off of your existing.
Your existing, yeah.
And then I'll just tell the story of Denim Group in the day when we got acquired by Coalfire. As one of the assets was a SharePoint instance that had thousands of statements of work, estimates, proposals, deliverables, PowerPoints. But darn it, if we, whenever we start a new project, we would say, oh, this is client B. It looks like client A. Let's go find that in the portal, copy and paste and do a save as, and just do a global replacement. That's the way consulting worked in the Big Four when I was in it 25 years ago. It still kind of works. What I would argue the new way of doing things is to have enough statements of works and enough work breakdown structures where you say, hey, here's the parameters of it. I don't have to take that out to Claude or ChatGPT. I just need to do the internal, and I have enough of them. So I can say, okay, I need to do a AI-informed pen test that is of this LLM-based software that does this, and this, whatever. And it comes back and it's pretty darn close. Because if on the professional services side, 30% of the churn is on the upfront part or 30% is on the deliverables. But if you're talking RFPs, even more so, because the win rate is like 30% or 20%. So like if you can do that automatically and get more of them out there using stuff that's a retread of what you've already done, that is actual magic, right?
Okay, but since you said it, now I'm going to ask you about it. How do you pen test an LLM?
Oh, wow. Well, I would reference you right to the OWASP top 10 for LLMs is a good starting point. I mean, there's like you're looking to see if you can do things like prompt injections and test to see if you can get data out. You're looking, and there's a whole section of how do you test the model itself to see if you can get, do things. But I would just point you straight to the OWASP top 10 for LLMs as a good starting point. The other question I would ask, it's probably a bigger business question, is how do you get all of industry to ask that question? Because right now they're still playing the same sheet music from 10 years ago. Let's do pen test. Well, we have a pen test. Let's do another pen test. That's how do we get all of the buyers in the planet to ask that question? Hey, can you give me a proposal for a penetration test that covers AI? Stuff. We're still seeing the same stuff from from 15 years ago. I mean, or from 30 years ago. One man's pen test is another man's scan. Is another man's.
Yeah. Oh no. We're not going into that because I don't have bourbon poured in my coffee cup, and I don't. Nobody wants to hear that rant.
So many stories.
All the stories. So if I'm hearing what you guys said correctly, then my understanding of if somebody were to ask me right now after this conversation, what do you mean security? What does security mean when it comes to large language models and AI? I would say it's all the governance stuff, right? How do we not lose data? How do we not leak data? It is, and I think that's probably the predominant one. The second one is how do we, from an architectural perspective, right? How do we design these things so we're not? It's kind of like, and this second part to me is like, hey, there's a whole library out there of Kubernetes instances. Why not just download one and use it? You're like, because you have no idea what's in that thing, right? And so that you have to examine the thing you're downloading and implementing to make, like Roger said, make sure it's not sending off pieces of your data to some lightly unfriendly nation state of the United States that would love some more of our like intellectual capital that it doesn't have yet to complete the set. And then there's things like adversarial testing, right? And we'll work with reference people back to the OWASP model, and then there's like all the other. So those are like slightly new. And then there's all the old stuff that comes along with it, like security of the code itself, of the system, underlying systems, access to them, all that, right? Are we missing any?
The model, security model.
I agree, but there's also something else over here that I'll point out. Well, firstly, I'm just going to get on the soapbox for a second and rant that unfortunately many of these things really are common sense. But I've always marveled at the fact that common sense seems to be so rare. Exactly. It's just like it's a precious commodity, isn't it? But let's take a step back here. One of the things that actually hit the news, it was all over the news. Maybe it was overhyped, but yesterday there was this news article that came out about how Meta AI is being used to leak therapy sessions. And if you take a closer look at it, there's actually no problem with there doesn't seem to be a problem with Llama or Meta AI or things they're doing on the back end. But it's in the user experience. It's in the interface in WhatsApp where when you click something in the top right, it takes the thing that you want to share and it shares it, posts it publicly. So you might be using Meta for therapy. You might be using it to ask about medical details. Or you might ask Meta, hey, share everything you know about me. And then you hit the button and boom, it posts it it literally posts it for everyone to see. Now, this is not an AI shortcoming. It's a shortcoming around the UI that's used to deliver AI as well. We've got to remember that too. I mean, the bottom line is, yes, we talk a lot about the LLMs on the back end, we talk about the storage, we talk about the training, but sometimes it's at the ridiculously simple presentation layer too. So that's also a place we've got to also keep in mind.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about how many security breaches have happened in the last 30 years that were UI driven.
That's right.
I mean, constantly. I mean, massive leaks of data, massive issues like what Raj was talking about with Meta. I mean, UI, it's that user interface issue. I used to do a talk quite often. I think Raf's heard it as well, where I would sit in front of large groups of people and I would talk about, we really only have 2 security threats. There's only 2 in the entire world. You have external entities, which are bad guys, the proverbial people in their basement, all those guys that are trying to take your data, take your business down, blah, 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 blah. And you have internal employees. And your internal employees don't mean to be, but they make mistakes like that. They click the wrong button. And those are the only 2 threats we have at the end of the day. And, you think about things like that, and especially in the AI realm, we see so much of this. People push data. And, one of the things that I'm so deathly afraid of is as we go down this path with AI is that we're going to try to do a lot of the things that we historically did to quote unquote protect ourselves. We spent 30 years trying to stop credit cards and data leaking from organizations using platforms like DLP. And, 30 years later, we all basically still want to burn down effectively every DLP platform on the planet. Well, now we're going to have an AI LP.
Yeah.
And that'll probably be Gartner's new term. So I'm sure they've.
Oh, you heard it here first.
And,
Jeff just made up a new one.
We're going to have that.
You're an inventor.
Yeah. And the reality is we're going to be in the same situation we were. We're going to block the good stuff. We're going to allow the bad. And at the end of the day, we're not going to fix anything. And so, my hope is as we progress forward, we use some of those common sense things like Raj is talking about. Let's do things that, let's train our employees. Let's tell them, hey, this is how you use AI. I mean, it's shocking. Like, instead of just walking around with a stick, maybe we could have like a carrot and we could teach people.
Yeah.
But, I just see inevitably we're going to go down this path of we're going to build 32,000 tools. We're going to try to integrate all 32,000 together, and magically in a perfect scenario, in a perfect world, they're all going to work together. Or we could just train people to not do stupid things.
100%. I mean, Jeff, before I show you my new AI, can you please enter your password? It's your mother's maiden name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Johnny said model. What does that mean?
No, model, like the security of the model itself.
Yeah.
The confidence in the model. I just don't want to, that's in a whole another area. I just want to throw out one thing just to make y'all aware of. There's a cool set of projects that are happening under the Linux Foundation. It's called the Alpha Omega. And we're participating in it as one of the partners. But basically what they're doing is AWS, Microsoft, and Google funded this effort to do security work for the open source projects on LLMs. Threat modeling, coaching, looking at pull requests, basically helping these teams because they built this capability and now this capability is relied on by all these major providers. I think that's a pretty positive model that's out there for getting them to build resilience, and getting developers to do the right sets of things, absent of the punitive nature of security. It's not auditing. It's not, and I've said this as an AppSec guy forever. If we can make AppSec just another aspect of code quality, like UI, like other than, then we have succeeded. It's not an audit function. It's not out of the dev process. It's not, I'm not going to say it shifting to the opposite of right. But if we can get those guys to do this as a aspect of code quality in LLM, with LLMs or AI created code, then we've succeeded. We're not there yet, 30 years later.
I wonder if that name Alpha and Omega was slightly tongue in cheek because the beginning and the end. Okay, that worked.
I don't know how they got it. I'm just saying, there are days as a security person that I weep internally, and other days where I'm like, there's promise. I'm the guy that says, when November rolls around, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. If you're not aware of it, if you're not aware of it by now, then you're a ransomware candidate. So I call that Resource Allocation Month, Cybersecurity Resource Allocation Month. spend more.
Yeah. All right.
There are good patterns of activity that are emerging, and that was just a cool project that I was.
That is a good one. This is a similar conversation to when cloud started, the reference models for cloud started circulating on Twitter, and people were like, now is our chance. Now we can build security in, get everybody to understand all the things about cloud and the potential for security risks and how we can protect it, and then we just got to get involved now. And then 15 years later, we're like, crap, nobody listened. I feel like the consequences for the crap nobody listened in 15 years will be way more dire than just people becoming more dumb.
Let me tell one last story, and this is relevant to this one. About 6 years ago, I helped a lawmaker in the state of Texas author something called HB 8, I think it was, the Omnibus Cybersecurity Bill in the state of Texas. And there were 3 big components in it. One was to do training for everybody. One was to make sure that none of the state agencies' CISOs reported to the CIO. Think about that one for a second. Most of them did.
Yeah.
CISOs reported to CIO. And the third one was to mandate that end-of-life servers had to be retired within a certain time frame. Why don't y'all guess what 2 of the 3 components got eviscerated from the bill, and which one remained when it got passed?
I bet the one that stayed was the education one, and the other 2
Absolutely. Got zeroed out. So
Yep.
So most of my private data probably lives in Austin and not in DC. And so that was not a great win there. And we're actually readdressing that, but that's a great example. Like you have like old school Microsoft servers that are in your data center that are like crazy out of date and probably vulnerable. And
2008 R2.
So that's the world we live in. It's constant, making the business case. And here we are again with AI, making the business case for it.
Okay, so this is kind of a dark cloud to end this portion of this episode on. Can somebody help lighten this mood just a little bit when it comes to security and LLMs? Like, tell me it's going to be okay, please.
Ralph, I just say 15% of my no. Look, the bottom line over here is, firstly, we're more aware of this than we've ever been.
Yeah,
we're early on this one. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when this happened with big data and happened with cloud, and it happened with all these other cases, everyone drank the Kool-Aid, and then the doomsayers turned around and said, "Hey, okay, now we're gonna rain on your parade." That's not what's happening over here. From day one, as LLMs launched, it met the same kind of resistance, or at least the same kind of skepticism as we saw with Shadow IT. It really, really hit early. So we have the opportunity right now to get ahead of this rather than be surprised by it.
absolutely.
And most organizations, I mean, when people started launching ChatGPT, most organizations immediately went and said, "Okay, you know what? No, let's tap the brakes here for a second." So we are ahead of the curve on this for once. And we see these technologies coming out for discovery of AIs and what have you. So yes, it does seem bleak right now, but I'm really confident that the industry is gonna hit this one better than the ones we've had in the past.
I love it. Absolutely agree. And I would say we're informed by all those transitions. IoT, cloud, mobile, all these things, we were aware of them. And I think this is still crazy early. And again, I'm going to quote Anton Chuvakin. He said, "We don't have enough cases to have use cases or best cases right now." So it's early and you can do it right. And I see great dialogues happening. So there is reason for hope, but you got to have guardrails. You have to have use cases. You have to have that person thinking what could go wrong, not just the 80% code efficiency that the vendors or the analyst groups are pushing down. Like, you got to do this. This CEO fear of missing out is pushing organizations hard to go fast without a lot of the hows and wherefores right below it. That's the problem.
That is a new phenomenon, and this we'll just end the show here. Is this cloud? There was a certain level of FOMO that came with cloud and AI. Sorry, and CIOs were pushed to adopt cloud because all the other companies will be we won't be as competitive. I feel this for LLMs, this was from like day zero. FOMO hit real hard in the C-suite, and companies like, and you know what? Who I'm blaming for this? All the hucksters and the carnies out there that are pushing their AI replace all the humans companies. All these tech bros out there that are telling people that you can fire all your developers. All you need is my AI for, and it turns out just like
HBR, Harvard Business Review, get us every other magazine has a cover of how AI is transforming business. I would go back even 5 or 6 years ago, and it's like that's what CEOs read.
Yeah.
Is that?
All right. Well, I tried to end it on a positive note. I didn't quite stick the landing, but I got close. All right, guys, this has been fun. Thank you so much for joining. I think after this, we're going to try to, I keep thinking I want to try to bring Eric back and have a very specific conversation on AI in the SOC, in the security operations, like where are we getting benefit and how is it helping some companies? So if you've got some experience adopting co-pilots and various security tools with AI built in, or AI, like some LLM out there, hit me up. I want to talk through some of that. It may be next week, it may be the week after, I'm not sure, but we're going to continue this series. Guys, Jeff, Raja, John, thanks so much for giving so much of your time up. This is fantastic. I certainly have learned quite a bit. As I often say on this podcast, my brain is full. It's time to stop. Thanks, you guys. This has been awesome. And we'll catch you guys on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast in the future. I promise I'm not an AI LLM, although I sound like one sometimes. We'll